Hey kiddos! So today we are going to just be reading two chapters in Hello Universe, chapters 30 and 31. Okay, so chapter 30 starts on page 218, so 218. Chapter 30, Small. There were so many things you could do with a stick. That's why Shep liked sticks so much. You could poke and hit stuff. You could swing it around like a weapon. But most importantly, at least for today, you could root out snakes. He hadn't seen a single snakeskin. He should have taken Davies with him and demanded that he point out exactly where he had found it. That would set him straight. Only Shep didn't want to share the spotlight when he captured the real snake. That glory would be his, and his alone. He imagined just how it would go. Him tying the knot in the pillowcase with the snake wiggling and wriggling inside, and then carrying the sack home like it was a triumphant bounty hunter. He would insist on keeping it as a pet, and once it was coiled inside its tank, he would call it Davies. He would call Davies right over and show him what he'd done with his bare hands. And that's exactly what he'd say, too. I caught it with my bare hands. Shep wasn't so sure how his parents should feel about keeping a snake in the house. He could probably talk his mother into it. He seemed to be able to talk her into anything, especially if his father backed him up, but he didn't know how his dad felt about snakes. Shep liked to think his father wasn't afraid of anything, but he knew that everyone had their weaknesses, even him. Shep would never tell anyone in a million years, but despite it being the bravest person he knew, he was afraid of dogs. Not little pipsqueak ones like chihuahuas. He could feed one of those to a snake, no problem. No, it was the big ones that made him uneasy. There were a few other things he was afraid of too, like the fact he might not make the basketball team, no matter how hard he practiced. He already failed at Little League, never hit the ball, not even once. And Boyd Middle School didn't have football, so that would have to wait. Basketball was his best shot at becoming an athlete. You might as well be nothing if you don't excel at something. That was one of his dad's favorite expressions. And right now, Shep was batting average was at every Shep was batting average at everything. Basketball could change that. The snake could too. That's why he had a backup plan in case his parents wouldn't let him keep it. He would ask his father to take a picture of him holding it up, the way fishermen did with their big catches. Then he would text the picture to Davies with something clever like, "So you found a snakeskin, huh? Why don't you tell me the story again?" Shep mentally crafted these series of clever texts as he walked through the woods with his stick and pillowcase. He scanned the ground as he went, looking for places snakes might be, like big thickets of brush where it's easy to hide. "But you can't hide from me," Shep bellowed as if the snake spoke English. He wondered what he'd name it after his capture. What is a good name for a snake? Killer? No, too juvenile. Cobra? Too obvious. Chet said, jabbing a mound of leaves at the base of a tree. Maybe Smag. Yes, Smag. That sounded both threatening and snake-like. Besides, dragons and snakes were probably related. When nothing slithered out of the leaves, Chet continued walking, yelling, "Smug! Here, Smug!" He liked it like he was calling Kitty. Each time he saw a pile of leaves and twigs, he jabbed and poked and called out for Smog. And his heart didn't even pound. He was really made of some tough stuff. And then, swish, there was a rustling in the leaves, similar to what he had heard when he discovered the girl Valencia. He stopped and looked around. It was hard to tell where the sound was coming from, but he couldn't hear it anymore. He suddenly got a distinct feeling that he was being watched by someone or something. Hello? He said. His voice sounded weak, so he tried to give it more gusto. Is anyone there? No answer. What if that deaf girl was hiding in the trees? What if she was putting a hex on him? He waited. When nothing happened, he rolled his eyes and mumbled, "Whatever." He poked the leaves with his stick and heard something, this time from the ground. He paused, poked again. Took a step closer so his toes of his sneakers brushed the pile of leaves. He definitely heard something move in there. His body rushed with adrenaline. Goosebumps exploded on both arms, even though it was 1,000,000 degrees outside. He tightened his grip on the stick and swept away at the leaves. He hadn't expected to find anything, really. Yes, he was on a snake hunt, but he had been at it for an hour, and now it just become something to do. He didn't realize that he no longer expected to find Smog until he actually found him. The snake immediately lifted its head. It was the width of a garden hose, but not very long. At that moment, Shep realized how little he actually knew about snakes. He knew how he would grab it, by the tail, of course, so he wouldn't have to put his hand near the snake's mouth. But he had no clue whether it was poisonous or not. Could snakes this small be venomous? How was he supposed to know? It probably would have been smart to do some research, but there was no time for that. He couldn't pull out his phone and Google it with the Smog's eye on him, and this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The snake was exposed, waiting for capture. The time was now. Shep's heart thundered. "Adrenaline," Shep mumbled. "Not fear, adrenaline." The snake wasn't doing anything, just staring, not hissing. It didn't sway back and forth like a sumo wrestler, just rested there, head raised, almost like it was waiting to be picked up and petted, almost like it was meant to be his pet, almost like fate. Shep tossed the stick aside and flicked the pillowcase open with one melodramatic motion. He took a big, deep breath, moved closer. The second he leaned in, the snake reared its head back, and Shep wildly grabbed at its tail, which gave Smug plenty of time to open air, to swing around in one quick motion and sink its fangs into the thick, ruddy skin of Bull's right forearm. It felt like the claws of a kitten digging into him. He knew what that felt like. His cousin had a vicious cat, but cats were one thing and snakes were quite another. So he immediately dropped Smog and howled. Certainly he would die in less than 5 minutes. His forearm turned pink right away and his skin burned. He imagined the poison traveling through his veins and attacking his heart. Who would find his body? That deaf girl? That retarded boy? And what would they know? And would they know how he died? If one of them found him, he'd at least know that he died of a life or death fight with a vicious reptile. He cradled his arms and stared at it. The pillowcase was crumpled in the leaves like a deflated balloon, and he suddenly realized he had no idea where Smog had gone. The snake had vanished. Shep walked about 20 feet from the scene of the attack, searching for it. He sat at the base of a sturdy pine tree and waited to die. Well, that was an intense chapter. Chapter 31, page 227. Unpredictable happenings. Virgil wasn't home, which means he's in trouble. I know it, said Curie. We need to have the ceremony. After they returned from Virgil's house, they collapsed on the floor of the Taninka's living room to discuss their next plan of action. They also turned on the television, which had lured Jen's attention away. All for the better, as far as Curie was concerned. Who needs the inside of a child where the matters of life and death are at stake? Just Renee frowned at the TV and said, "It's hard for me to make out the sounds with the TV on in the background. Makes everything garbled." She wiggled her hands around her ears as if it was a universal sign for garbled. Do you mind if we lower it? Curie glared at her sister. Turn that thing down. Jen muted it, but didn't look away. Did you say something about a ceremony? Renee asked Curie. Curie's face turned serious. She straightened her back and folded her hands in her lap. The ceremony of lost
things, Curie said solemnly. It's a ritual to help us find Virgil, but we can't do it here. We have to go into the woods. The ceremony only works if you're one with nature, and this certainly isn't nature. She gestured towards the television. The clock on the wall, a hideously ugly practical thing, in Curie's opinion, said it was 2:19. She wondered how long people had to be lost to be considered a missing person. It hadn't been that long, but a lot of bad things could happen in 3 hours and 19 minutes. Curie anticipated just Renee's next question. What's the ceremony of lost things? Truth be told, Curie had no idea. She was sure that there was a proper ceremony that could help gifted mediums find lost items or people. She just didn't know what it was. No matter, she would figure it out as she went along. The ancestors would guide her. There's no time to explain all the details, said Curie. She stood quickly and snapped her fingers in her sister's direction. Jen turned her head, but not her eyes from the TV. Curie sighed. Really, Jen was more trouble than she was worth sometimes. Curie had explained that television was too practical, too traditional, too everyday for the Taninka daughters, but the poor kid didn't seem to get it. Jen, said Curie, get Mom's secret matches. We're going into the woods. Mrs. Taninka kept a box of matches in the second drawer under the microwave. She used them to light her secret cigarettes, the ones she thought she was hiding from her daughters. As if. You can't hide anything from me, Mother, Curie once said. I inherited the second sight. Inherited from who? Her mother asked. No one on either side of her family has ever been remotely interested in such things. Mrs. Taninka had no appreciation for the bloodlines of former lives, and the kind that stretched back generations, the one that no one knew about. When Curie imagined her birth, she pictured herself emerging from a patch of lavender, dark-haired and full of rage at the injustice of her past lives, of which there were two. The first time she walked the earth, she'd been in ancient Egypt. She knew this because it came to her in a dream. She saw herself slipping between the pyramids in a long white robe. What other explanation was there except that she had once walked through the pyramids in real life? In her second life, she was a freedom fighter from Bangladesh. She knew because she once seen a snippet of a documentary on television, and when they showed images of Bangladesh, they really looked familiar to her, and she couldn't explain why. She probably could have learned more if her father hadn't switched the channel. She tried to explain that the documentary was necessary for her to explore past life transgressions, but he said that it was March Madness and the past life transgression didn't happen during college basketball season. Just because her parents didn't know about her secret heritage and the magical and mystical powers didn't make them not so. But because her parents had always been monstrously unimaginative. Take the smoking, for instance. Mrs. Taninka smoked 1 or 2 cigarettes a week on the back patio, but she failed to consider that Curie's bedroom window was usually downwind, which meant the smoke blew right by the spirit chamber. Clueless. Jen didn't make a move for the matches right away. Instead, she took her precious time getting up so she could catch the end of her show. She didn't get the fire under her until Curie snapped again. Life-saving missions don't wait for commercial breaks, you know, she said. Besides, you need to hurry before Mr. and Mrs. Taninka get home. Jen was still dragging her feet as just Renee strode toward the door with her bag slung on her shoulder. Curie snatched one of her mother's decorative candles out of the candlestick on the table, stuck it in her back pocket, and followed just Renee outside. Once the door opened, Jen picked up her pace. She grabbed her jump rope and slung it over her shoulder. Why do you bring that thing everywhere we go? Asked Curie. It's not as if we're going to jump rope through the trees. You never know when you might need to jump rope, said Jen. Curie rolled her eyes. Really, you are a wonder. She took the matches from her little sister, and the three of them stepped into the blazing hot sun. It's hot, Jen said. We should cook an egg. She heard somewhere that was possible, to cook an egg on a car or cement if it was hot enough outside. She'd been needling Curie about it ever since. We don't have time for science experiments, said Curie. She locked the front door and shoved the house key deep inside her pocket. Just Renee was already a few feet ahead, making her way towards the street. It only takes 2 seconds to crack an egg, Jen said. How can you think about eggs at a time like this? Curie said. She and Jen followed Just Renee, who stopped at the Taninka's mailbox to wait. I bet he's okay, said Jen. He probably just forgot. What's the worst thing that could have happened? You don't want me to answer that, Curie said. Where are we going exactly? asked Just Renee. Yeah, said Jen. Where are we going with the matches and a candle exactly? Curie pointed straight ahead without breaking her stride, like a general leading troops into battle. That way, she said. And as they crossed the street and entered the woods side by side, Jen tugged at Renee's sleeve. Do your hearing aids hurt? She asked. Sometimes they itch or make a dent in my ear. Hurts a little, Renee said. The trees brought much needed shade from the heat. Curie took note of their surroundings, thinking. She wasn't very familiar with the woods, truth be told. They creeped her out. The woods were full of unpredictable happenings, snapping creatures, falling branches, stinging insects. She preferred the comforts of her home, where she always knew what to expect. But what choice did she have? It's not like they're going to find Virgil hiding under one of the sofa cushions. Why do you still have to read lips if you have hearing aids? Asked Jen. Twigs crunched under her feet. They don't make me hear everything clearly the way you do. I have to fit the sounds with the shapes the lips make, like a puzzle, Renee said, looking from Jen to the woods. And then I have to fit the sounds and the shapes with the situation, because so many words look the same when you lip read, like mat and mad, or pat and pad. Were you born deaf? No, I could hear a little. That's how I learned to talk, but then it went away mostly. I wonder if mine will go away. Doubtful. Could you read lips from far away if you had binoculars or a telescope? Curie couldn't take it anymore. How was she supposed to become one with the forest if Jen kept talking? Stop asking so many questions, Curie snapped. She heard buzzing near her ear and then swatted at it. Jen blinked at her. Why? Because it's rude. Just Renee doesn't mind. She looked up at her newest client and tapped her hand. Do you? I mind, Curie said. We need to stay focused, and your prattling isn't helping. Curie didn't want to admit it, but she liked having Jen as her second in command, which meant she was always first in command, which meant she needed to be in charge. But Just Renee seemed to be a natural take charge person. She was leading the way, and even though she had no idea what they were supposed to be looking for, Curie would bet money she was a Leo. Let's stop here, Curie said. Jen stopped, then Just Renee. They both looked at Curie curiously. To properly conduct this ceremony, we need a special type of stone, said Curie, with just as much authority as she could. Like the 5 stones you told Virgil to get? Jen asked. What 5 stones? Asked Just Renee, looking from little sister to big sister. Curie ignored the question. There was no time to explain the minor details. We only need one. It's called a snakeskin agate. Just Renee tilted her head. Did you just say you needed a snakeskin agate? Yes, a snakeskin agate, Curie repeated. What's that? Asked Jen. It's a stone. It could be as small as a pigeon egg. Curie opened her empty hand as if the agate would magically appear there. It's a rock with scales. That's why it's called a snakeskin. Just Renee frowned. We'll never find one of those in these woods. How do you know? Asked Curie. There's all kinds of rocks and things in here, because snakeskin agates are usually found in dry riverbeds along beaches, places where there's water. Just Renee looked around at the dry twigs and towering trees. There definitely isn't any water around here. Jen crossed her arms and raised her eyebrows at Curie. Now what? Curie didn't know what to say. For all she knew, Just Renee was right. Curie had never actually seen a snakeskin agate, after all, but she studied endless pages of gems online, and she knew which ones were used for what. The snakeskin agate helped you find lost things, and Virgil was lost, if not to himself, then to her. And as silly and ridiculous as Virgil was, she wanted to know he was alive and breathing. I suppose we don't necessarily need to find a snakeskin agate precisely, said Curie. Maybe just something like it. I mean, it's a gem you're supposed to use, but whatever. I guess we could just use a rock with scales, something close enough. Maybe your energy will make up for the rest. Jen looked up at Just Renee to gauge her reaction. What do you think? She asked. Curie frowned. She never heard Jen ask anyone else for guidance before, not even her parents. Just Renee studied Jen's face, then looked at Curie. A few seconds passed before she said, if your sister says we need to find a rock with scales, I guess we need to find a rock with scales. Curie's shoulders relaxed. Something passed between the two older girls then, a mutual understanding that didn't need to be spoken, and Curie, being a gifted person of second sight, had a great appreciation for such things. She smiled at Just Renee, just a little, just a hint, and Just Renee smiled back. That is when they heard the screaming. Ooh, I wonder what they're hearing and who is the one that's screaming. So I want you to think about, they were talking about not having water in the woods, and so I want you to think about where there could have been water that Valencia knows about. And just as a reminder that, remember, when it's saying Just Renee, that's the fake name Valencia gave to Curie. So Curie still doesn't know her real name. Okay, so things are getting interesting. So next time that we join together and read, we'll be reading chapters 32 and 33.